Budgeting and business reform are two items Kathleen Hicks will focus on as the Deputy Secretary of Defense. At her confirmation hearing, she talked about improving defense spending and managing business operations efficiently. Mackenzie Eaglen is resident fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. Mackenzie, welcome. Thanks for coming on the program. I'm struck by the willingness of a new Deputy Secretary of Defense in any administration to really take on some pretty historic challenges in budgeting reform. Some of the things that Cathie Hicks has talked about are pretty striking in the potential ramifications for budgeting across the department, aren't they?
They are, and it shows what a deep insider she is and the decades of knowledge she has working inside and outside of the building. But she wrote about this in her Foreign Affairs article in the spring, and that a lot of those thoughts came out in the congressional hearing. The question, of course, is whether she can have that partner in Congress to make some hard choices. And what are some of those that she was calling for? She wants to end the use it or lose it, spending spree at the end of the fiscal year when the department goes and buys a bunch of flat screens or whatever equivalent, and isn't penalized for not using all of their money by the end of the year. She talked about ending the focus on service budget shares. If you make a tough call to say cancel a cherished weapons program or something, that you also will get to keep that money to reinvest, and that it won't be taken from you. She also talked about ending pass-through funding, for example, something we've talked about for the Air Force. In particular, I think the Air Force is hardest hit by this sort of money that it's not really belongs to the headquarters Air Force, but it belongs to the U.S. intelligence community and just sort of sits in their budget. But it's, anywhere from $20 to $40 billion per year that the Air Force doesn't control. If you take that off the books, it fundamentally changes the budget debate in the building and on Capitol Hill about, shares and what we're actually buying with those dollars.
I recall reading that article, Mackenzie, and not thinking about her at the time as a potential candidate to be the Deputy Secretary of Defense, but thinking about her as somebody who really knows the issues, as you say, really has been doing this for a long time as an absolute professional, and thinking, those are all great ideas. Those are ideas I can't imagine the committees of jurisdiction being willing to give to somebody. Is there an inflection point that we may be at that would allow Congress to give ground, not necessarily just to her, not necessarily to just this administration, but just to the department in general?
I totally agree with you. I mean, these are goals that are aiming quite high. They require consistent attention by the deputy and a little bit of a bully in the secretary himself to push these through, right? They have to constantly be advocated for. You have to do the shoe leather work on Capitol Hill behind the scenes to build your case. Some of these are issues with the authorizers, but in many cases, this is working with appropriators better. And if you looked at the 21 defense bills, appropriators continue to be unhappy with Pentagon leaders as they provide ever more reams of documents, enough justifications, information, and data to fill my room and yours each year, and it still isn't enough to satisfy Congress. So if she could overcome this burden once and for all and find out the better way to do things, that would really help. She talked specifically about innovation, right? Meaning finding a way to do things faster on software in particular, right? We all know that you can't have these sort of classic major defense programs of record for things that need to move a lot faster, like software. And, Congress continues to sort of do this very small potatoes and not in a mass. They haven't scaled this concept well. And that's something I think Cath could do, Francis, but she's definitely going to have to take small bites at this apple. But I'm cheering her on because this stuff has to get done.
Not thinking specifically pertaining to Secretary Hicks, but just more broadly to the enterprise. Is there an opportunity for simplification? As you're describing, the documents and so on, it strikes me, maybe explaining this stuff to Congress and explaining the import, maybe simplification, maybe more broad strokes than detail is the right approach, because we've been adding more detail for decades and the process isn't improving.
That's exactly right. So I think simplification and better relationships and trust are really the key ingredients. You're totally right. And the Hill is receptive to that, right? So again, if you look at the 21 bills, they talked about wanting better data visualization from Congress. So they don't just want the data dump in a bunch of Excel spreadsheets, right? They want it to be easily digestible to help the Pentagon, move faster and make better decisions and choices, and for Congress to do its oversight. So, in fact, I think that's a code word for simplification. If you're really getting at the heart of what they asked for, the bureaucracy, they've been slow to get to this place, but the technology is there. And they just really have to figure out how to thread that needle.
I suppose simplification at the Defense Department is on my mind because I had occasion to look at a couple of slide decks from DOD this week, and simplification was not what I saw there. In the minutes that we have left, Mackenzie, your takeaway from Secretary Hicks's comments about what's happening with the Office of the Chief Management Officer, the responsibilities that used to live there and are now dispersing across the enterprise.
Yes. So she talked about needing a partner in Congress again for this as well. Pretty much many, of her answers ended with, and I look forward to working with you, which I do believe is true. But essentially what she said was she has read the memo by the current Deputy Secretary of Defense, David Norquist, and his proposals to shift a lot of those duties in various offices throughout the department. But I would say the bulk of the responsibility will fall to the Comptroller's office, no surprise, since that's where David came of age. And Dr. Hicks, indicated that she largely supported the contours of that memo, but of course wants to get in and understand its details. I suspect we'll see that framework be the one that they largely move forward with under Hicks as deputy. So you'll see the comptroller taking the lead role for many of those CMO duties, with Cape and the deputy picking up the rest.
Mackenzie Eaglen, thanks very much as always.
Thanks.